Welcome to the Tesla Economist. Please hit the thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe. It's looking quite likely that EV tax credits might actually come into fruition. We've been given those details on how the EV tax credits could work for the Clean Energy for America Act. As we know, Tesla and GM have already exceeded their tax credits, as they were capped to 200,000 units per manufacturer. So let's go through all the details of the tax credit and try and examine what effect it might have on Tesla. As you've probably heard, there's an initial tax credit of $7,500 for all EVs, then an additional $2,500 for vehicles assembled in the US. Sorry Mustang Mach-E, that doesn't include you. Then a further $2,500 for cars whose production works are members of labour unions. Okay, Tesla actually loses out on that one. In other words, for all the made in US Teslas, they suddenly reduced in price by a whopping $10,000 to American consumers, which is over 25% discount for the standard Model 3, taking them to under $30,000. Now, at this price point, who's not going to want one? I guarantee you, right now, there are people pre-ordering Model 3s and Ys to get in the queue to take advantage of this before everyone else, as the waiting list is about to go from 3 months to 6 months to perhaps 12 months. Coinciding nicely in time with the new Texas facility launching the Model Y to somewhat help with demand. The Cybertruck also qualifies for these, so that waiting list will now be even more insane. The thing is, as affordable as a Tesla is, as an EV, it's still very much an elastic good. In other words, when the price drops, demand does not increase linear. For example, a 25% price drop doesn't result in 25% more demand, but possibly more like 100% more demand. Of course, the way to reduce demand is increase prices. As we've seen lately, Tesla have actually been raising their prices, likely due to so much extra demand, but there may be other reasons associated too. Now, if demand rises so much, it's possible Tesla may raise prices further again. I wouldn't say as much as the whole $10,000, but possibly $2,000 or $3,000 maybe. The other alternative would be to do what they did for the Y with the 3 and remove the standard model and only offer a long range and performance, just offering the versions with the highest profit margins. This is actually not applicable to all EVs. There is a cap to $80,000, which is actually quite high, maybe because they think the legacy autos are struggling so much to get affordable priced EVs, but they didn't want people to buy luxury Model S's and X's through it either. However, saying that, the Model S starts at $79,990, so actually made the cut by $10. Of course, even if it didn't, then Tesla would have just cut their prices slightly anyway, which might possibly be what they do with the X. Tesla might introduce a new version of the Model X with possibly lower range and a lower spec that can come in under $80,000. The demand for the new S and X is already going to be crazy. If they're now available at $10,000 less, then they literally won't be able to deal with it. They'll have to build more lines or factories. If a new factory did have the Model S and X, then it would possibly use gigapresses, structural battery packs, and 4680 batteries, increasing the profit margins on them even further, perhaps almost as high as 40%. With the $80,000 cap, it would mean that Lucid can also compete at this price range to take advantage of the tax credit, along with Rivian, as they also start under $80,000. But as for the likes of the Audi e-tron GT or the Porsche Taycan, well, it just got $10,000 harder for them. The tax credit will start to phase out once the qualified plug-in electric vehicles and fuel cell motors exceed 50% of the new vehicle sales in the US. Currently, vehicle sales in the US sit maybe around 16 to 18 million cars a year, but if this bill passes, then demand for vehicles will likely increase, due to people wanting a cheap EV. But that doesn't mean supply can match. Let's think about this for a second. What's going to be the consumer behaviour here? Suddenly, everyone wants EVs and no longer wants ICE cars. Sales for ICE cars plummet as demand switches to electric, but there's not enough supply to match the demand. Consumers are happy to wait an extra year or two until they get their EV at this discounted price. This would mean that car sales would most likely dwindle in the meantime, as everyone wants to wait for an EV. But the waiting list may be 1 or 2 years. Ouch. Can't be good for legacy autos. There's a mention of car sales reaching about a 50% EV market share within about 3 years. Well, if Tesla went all out and things went well, it's possible Tesla may have their capacity up to 6 to 8 million cars in the US by then. Sounds unbelievable? Well, Fremont could do 1 million, Texas could do 2 million, another factory could do 2 million, and they could have a Model 2 factory there doing 2 or 3 million. This would, however, involve sacrificing other markets. It's possible the competition for EVs in the US by this stage may have even reached 1 million a year by then, or perhaps around 500,000. Now, although there may only be enough supply to the US of 8 million EVs a year, and the new car market demand may be even closer to 20 million at this stage, due to everyone now wanting an EV, it's highly possible that very few consumers now want to buy an ICE car. So that 20 million demand might only end up being more like 12 to 14 million in sales. In other words, they're likely to exceed that 50% threshold earlier than we think. But not for the reason the government think, i.e. not just because there's so many more EVs being bought, but also because there are so many less ICE cars being bought, thus reducing the entire car market size with it. So although the government are increasing the supply and demand of EVs, they're also killing the ICE cars at the same time. Oh dear, yet another nail in the coffin for the legacy automakers. Of course, the government haven't thought this through, and probably think they're just protecting Ford and GM against Tesla. But wait, even once we hit this threshold, the EV credit doesn't even end. All it does is start a reduction of credits. The credit is then reduced by 25% for a vehicle purchased during the second calendar year, 50% the third calendar year, and 100% after that. So it would appear there is still a reasonable credit for the following 3 years once the 50% mark has been achieved. Elon has actually said in the past that Tesla would likely build another factory in the US in the Northwest to cater for that market. I think if this bill passes, then it makes sense for Tesla to rearrange their business plan where the market is and where the profit is. They would need to build additional factories to meet the extra demand. I think this would also make Tesla rethink their entire Model 2 strategy. I think they would scrap the potential factory in China for now and immediately redirect it to the US and build a Model 2 factory there. Maybe, or they might just postpone the Model 2 entirely for years, as they would essentially already have an EV under $30,000 for the US. Why bother putting batteries in a car you're selling for the equivalent of $25,000 when there's enough demand for them in a $40,000 car, or even an $80,000 car? However, if they did build the Model 2 in the US, then they wouldn't likely launch with the $25,000 model immediately. They could launch with a long-range equivalent, perhaps between $30,000 to $35,000, which comes in at $20,000 to $25,000 for the consumer after tax savings, which means massive profit margin for Tesla. Their only concern being that they don't cannibalize their Model 3 sales. It would give them about 5 years or so to gather enough economies of scale and advances in batteries and manufacturing so that when the tax credits do expire, they can launch a $25,000 model anyway. If Tesla went through with the Model 2 factory in China, then it would immediately cost an additional $2,500 in missed credits, not to mention the logistic issues and costs associated. I don't think it would be feasible. Tesla's presence in China would be neglected massively, giving opportunity to the local Chinese manufacturers to likely take a good share of that market. Tesla could possibly get Shanghai close to 1 million vehicles a year, still using third-party LFP batteries for their cars, so they wouldn't have to sacrifice the precious 4680 supply. But there would be little point selling 4680 battery cars in China, when they can make such higher margins on the US cars they sell with those batteries. This will allow the local Chinese competition to get a better market share in China, that Tesla will likely not get back. This will be a big sacrifice. As a result, it would be years until Tesla could scale up enough to supply China in high quantities. The same would be true for Europe. It would be heavily neglected. Berlin should be able to get up to 2 million cars a year within a few years, which still is a huge lead over the competition. Of course, it's possible Europe might also want to compete and start offering huge tax credits as well. Of course, the European EVs will also want to take advantage of the tax credits in the US as well, and may end up building factories in the US. For example, Volkswagen might make electric cars there too, which might mean all EVs are somewhat postponed in Europe, and maybe the likes of NIO will do similar things. But Tesla need to protect their home turf too. This is a huge advantage for all the US legacy autos, at least initially. The incumbents might actually be able to make a profit on their EVs, and they'll sell because the waiting list for Teslas will be too long, and the other EVs will actually start at a reasonable price now relative to ICE cars. Tesla can't ignore that and have to double down on the US market. This is their biggest market and the one they want to continue to dominate. We hear that China is the largest market for cars. Well, in quantity perhaps, but not in dollars. That's the US. And when it comes to accounting, it's about how much profit you make, not how many sales you make. I say that Tesla may have to sacrifice other markets as a result, but they may not as much. Instead, the real sacrifice might end up being energy. Rather than making more battery storage, Tesla end up having to use these batteries more for cars. Elon can say he wants other automakers to transition as much as possible, but in reality, he wants Tesla to dominate. And as shareholders, so do we all. It may also mean that we see even further delays in the semi-truck and possibly the Roadster too. The bill also includes a 30% tax credit for manufacturers to retool or build new facilities to produce advanced energy technologies, including batteries, and new incentives to purchase commercial electric vehicles. Again, more incentive for Tesla to start building more factories in the US. So why are the government even doing this? It seems the transition was going to happen naturally. Tesla could achieve all of this without the help of the government. Tesla's growth was not constrained by money nor demand. Well, it is perhaps designed to help Tesla's competition transition, whether it's through cronyism or attempting to do what they can to keep the legacy autos afloat to save jobs and stocks crashing. But it's also competitiveness against nations. China have made a lot of noise about being the EV leaders in the world. Well, now it's a competition, and it seems that the US wants to win. Just like who could be first on the moon. Capitalism versus communism. On the other hand, if Tesla have actually sorted out their 4680 battery lines, it's possible that it might be very easy for Tesla to simply make more and more battery factories. The nickel supply isn't as important as it's made out, as they can use LFP as a substitute, and just make millions and millions of standard range Model 3s. At a $30,000 price point, you aren't far off the price of a Toyota Camry hybrid, and that doesn't even factor in the savings you get from gas and servicing. The Model 3 is a vastly superior car. It might be such a race for Tesla that they may just buy existing factories and retrofit those, as it still has a 30% tax credit too, rather than waiting an entire year for construction for both cars and batteries, which may possibly make more sense. Why delay another 12 to 18 months just so it's custom built? If I was Tesla, my objective would be to exhaust this tax credit as soon as possible with Teslas, so that by the time the legacy competition finally have an okay EV and some decent production numbers, the credits simply don't exist anymore, assuming if their objective is to crush the competition. As this credit is not per manufacturer, they all have to share what's available, and it works under a first-come, first-served basis. I don't think the government have a clue as to what the consequences of this bill will be. They probably don't realise what a challenge battery supply is, but they have likely taken a lot of the EV market away from China. A $7,500 to $12,500 credit is enormous. The market hasn't come to grips with this yet, only increasing Tesla stock by 2%. And sure, the bill hasn't passed yet, but Ford jumped 7% from the news, perhaps because they feel it has leveled out the playing field. Make no mistake though, this is huge for Tesla, and this is always why I say never sell your Tesla shares. I said there isn't much on the horizon for the company perhaps until Q3, and it's possible the stock price won't do much. But I also said it's Tesla, you just never know what can happen. There could be any sort of announcement, any day, that can make the stock jump. Once this passes, I don't think it would take long until we hear announcements of 1 or 2 new factories in the US. This gives Tesla 5 more years of absolute mass-scale production to get all their production costs so low that by the time the tax credits are finished, they can no doubt drop their prices enough to maintain that demand. Tesla is going to be huge in the US. It's already their biggest market, where they have the largest market share, and it's the biggest car market by dollars. Bottom line, what does it really mean for Tesla? Well, just more profit than anything. I don't think it can actually make them move any faster than before. Perhaps they can move faster at less efficiency due to the extra profits. And it could make the US legacy auto companies suffer that much faster, as they'll be investing heavily into EVs. Only by the time they get there, Tesla have somewhat exhausted the tax credits already. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and I'll keep giving this more thought on what consequences it could have. Thanks for listening. Please hit the thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe.